So I'd like to thank the council and the mayor for allowing me this honor to present your 2019 municipal budget. I will, for the next 2 hours, give you an overview. For,
Everybody bring
I promise to, this will just be an overview. We will have this presentation and the entire budget posted to the city website tomorrow, so everyone has their binder, and feel free to spend a lot of time with it, and there'll be plenty of opportunity to get into details over the next 30-plus days before the public hearing. So I will get started. I would first like to thank the department heads and your staff for assisting in this effort over the last several months. We started this process back in August and went through the respective committees, and I thank the council members and the mayor for all the time spent going through this this process since at least since October. And we went through this, and this just gives the public just an overview of what we've done. And we had our public workshop on the capital budget, proposed capital budget, back in December of 2018. We went through the finance committee, then met with all the department heads, went over their respective operating budgets, and we are now at the introduction phase of this process. So, and then we'll schedule our public hearing for the April 23rd council meeting, and which will give the public an opportunity to opine and ask questions at that time. So I'm just going to quickly just go through the goals. Looks familiar. We, clearly first priority is always about fiscal responsibility, hitting our goal of trying to keep it within the 1% range, which we've done over the last several years. Maintaining our AAA rating, which we just did again in February with all 3 credit rating agencies issuing their AAA grade to the city in the last bond issuance. And then we have a contract with PBA, which we've been negotiating since last year, which we were setting our goal to keep around that 2% range. And then on to just sort of technology and what the platforms that we use, and certainly how it provides a convenience to our citizens of Summit. And just have a few here. Again, it's a little more exhaustive in our municipal budget report that I provide. And to get into all the key actions of accomplishing this goal this year. And then getting into our city infrastructure, we have some pretty important projects that are ongoing and will start this year. Certainly the community center is one to complete. The firehouse design and construction specifications we're working on this year to get to a bid process. And then the summer free market, which we will be having a groundbreaking this coming Saturday. And then certainly the Broad Street West redevelopment plan is top of the agenda, and that will hopefully, we on April 2nd plan to introduce the Broad Street West redevelopment plan, and then we'll go on to developer designation. And hopefully contract negotiations will commence this year. And then just certainly some of the other aspects of what we're doing, we certainly are looking at what the impact will be on the Broad Street East lot and the parking dislocation that would take place when the firehouse project starts, and we've started those discussions and planning this year. And then affordable housing, which is the primary goal of ours to encourage that type of development in the city. And then just as far as communication, we're always fine-tuning and how we can improve. Our 4-year contract with Civic Plus is actually up this year. And I remember when I first started in September of 2015, that contract was approved. We went through the total rehaul of the city website, but we will, at the end of this year, be entertaining a new contractual relationship with hopefully with Civic Plus, which will then look to employ some new best practices that are out there. One thing that I think cities should be proud of is that out of that website redesign we did a few years back, when you start to look at a lot of the public entity websites in the state now, they're very similar to what our site looks like. So I think a lot of people took notice of our website at that time, and I think we instituted a lot of new, at the time, some unique changes to the city websites, and I think we certainly are a model in that respect. And then on to just certainly our employees and what we do to continue our education and keeping our skill level, and those are just some of the things that we look to do throughout the year. And then on to just things that we employ, education, promotion of what we do through the police department, parking, and then certainly what we're trying to do with our ride sharing to continue to encourage our resident downtown employees to participate in the program. And then lastly, our just customer service, and it's more than just professionalism and politeness. We look at our processes, and we're always continuing to improve that to become a more efficient organization for our public. So these are the things that we look to go through ongoing throughout the year. So let's get into the numbers of the budget, which is why we're here. So this just gives you it gets broken into sort of three funds. It's the general fund, which encompasses most of the municipal services, and then we have parking and sewer, which will follow this. Yes, it's a substantial increase here that you're looking at overall, but when the big number within our capital budget this year is the firehouse, which is $11.8 million, and we'll get more into that toward the end of the presentation. When you strip that out, you're still looking at an increase of maybe about 1%. We also will talk about an acquisition, a real estate acquisition, which is $1.55 million. When you strip that out, you actually see a 2% decrease. So, but for those two items in our capital budget, we would be showing a total decrease this year for overall. And then these are the sewer and parking services. Sewer is going down considerably because we had the joint meeting project through a year capital sort of contribution that was last year. So this overall picture encompasses all three funds, and again, when you strip out the firehouse as well as the Cedar Street real estate acquisition, you're looking at a 2.5% decrease overall for these budgets. So it's just important to note that it is not consistent with our municipal service where we're winding up, which is we've kept it very in line with last year. And there's I'll get into some other the cost drivers, but it's really, this increase is driven by really two line items in our capital budget. So this is just a very broad view snapshot of some of the budget points on the revenue side as well as some on the appropriation side. Municipal tax rate will increase this year by 1%. It actually is less than 1 cent on the tax rate, but it just comes out to about 1% increase. Our surplus is even. You'll see some increases in the local revenues, which I'll go through. The municipal tax levy will require, it's over a little bit greater than a point, but again, I will explain why that's not, the percentage increase is not greater than a point. It has all to do with our increase in our tax base. Salaries are going up overall. Not out of line what has been consistently over the last 5 years. When you look at it, salary and wages have probably increased over a 5-year period by maybe a little bit more than 2%, within the 2 to 3% range overall from 2015. And then pension this year, we were up to almost $250,000. So that's one of those cost drivers that certainly provided some pressure on the budget this year. So this is the tax base increase. We saw a $9.8 million increase over 2018. And what does that result in? It's for about approximately $428,000 in total tax revenue, new tax revenue as a result. And of that portion, a little over $83,000 is gained from that tax base increase. And then it's just the impact that it has, and that's why our rate is at 1% increase. It could have been a little bit higher, but for this increase in the tax base. So the rates just give you an overall. These are estimated numbers. It's pretty accurate to where the school district. If you were wondering why it might show a little higher, I mean, the school district shows their levy impact. We also incorporate the debt service that, you know, there is a rate associated with that debt service that plays into the overall levy of the school district. And then we've estimated 2% based upon what was been publicly stated with the county. And then the library that we know is less than 1%. Barely, it doesn't even show up as a cent increase. It's rough, probably a little bit lower. And this just breaks out the rates and the percentage associated with each entity. We've been in that 19% range for some time and remain there. School district a little bit over 50%. And then this just gives you, based on the average assessed value, residential assessed value this year of $417,500. It's according to our tax assessor. And then based on that, what a tax bill would look like based on these estimated numbers and what the dollar impact is. And what this works out to be per 100,000 on the municipal increase is about $8. Per 100,000. And then this just gives you a snapshot of the last 5 years where we've been. Pretty consistent when you average this out, where we've been. And then this just gives you the 5-year on all of the percentages. And the municipal blue, school is red, county green, and library is purplish color. Give you some frame of reference here. And then this is just the effective tax rate, which when you take the average assessed valuation, you multiply it by the equalization ratio, which this year is 42.79%. When you look at it that way and you employ all of the ratios for each municipality in Union County, this is how it sort of evens out, and we are the lowest in the county of how, just proportionally speaking, on the equalization ratio. So this gets into the general fund overview. Again, the tax levy is the highest portion of our overall tax revenues, our total general revenues, and where you see that $335,000 increase. But this just gives you the change year to year. And I'll get a little bit more into the local revenues and enterprise funds contributions. So one of the new revenues we have, which is really, it's sort of a quasi old revenue, new revenue, but we had a cell tower agreement that, and there were some co-locator companies that came on. So that's what we're kind of classifying as a new revenue because it kind of came in last year as a non-anticipated revenue. So that's part of now what we have as a total revenue, which is a little over 80,000 plus. And then just some of the increases, which the interest last year, I think it was a little over $500,000, March, on the total interest on investments. And that had a lot to do with the early tax payment in 2017 as a result of the federal tax reform. So we had a lot of cash sitting in our accounts that were earning interest. But we conservatively anticipated this year we're not going up to that amount. We could have went up just because we just don't have that much cash. But when you look at it over the last 5 years and what we're holding and where the interest rate is, I think we'll meet what we're projecting this year, which is somewhere between about 340,000, somewhere around there. And then some of the decreases, last year, one of the rainiest years we've had in many years, which had an impact on our golf course fee revenue. And then the recyclable field is, I think we've discussed that quite a bit, and that market has taken a hit, and we're just anticipating a much lower amount this year. And then in the contribution category, which there's really two main categories here, local revenues and enterprise fund contributions. Parking services is contributing almost $440,000 more than last year. Some of that has to do with a revenue that we lost in that category, which for many, many, many years, we used to budget a revenue for our debt service that many years ago, before it became a utility, it was wrapped up in the general fund and general obligations. So we used to bring over $400,000, whatever the payment was in that given year, from the parking utility to offset our municipal debt. And that number had been in the budget as a revenue source for many, many years. That debt is paid off, so it went away this year. So we sort of balanced that out where there was that cash that was freed up in the utility, and now we're bringing it over as an additional contribution from the utility. And then just some of the other decreases that we're seeing. And that's that $408,000 decrease. And a big number that has gone away from last year, why it's actually overall, that category is lower. We had 880 something thousand for the community center debt that we got in form of donations. That line item was in there last year. There was also an offsetting appropriation for that on the municipal debt service, but that went down to 81,000 and change this year. So that's why overall that category of revenue is down considerably. And then we go into the levies, which is our largest form of revenue. And this is, again, estimated numbers of where we'll be. And our municipal tax levy, again, over the last 5 years has been, I think it's under 4%. Maybe, actually, no, I'm sorry, under 3%. And the property tax levy, which again we are under considerably by $1.6 million. That adds on to what we've already have in our property tax levy cap bank. For next year, we'll have about $4 million in that cap bank. On to appropriations. Again, our total budget number is $51,984,799. These are the three categories for general appropriations and what they are comprised of. And then just gives you a breakdown in the municipal operations portion of it, public safety being the largest area. And then the other appropriations section. Our debt went down considerably, but our capital improvement number is up considerably, and that again has a lot to it. It's 5% of whatever our capital budget is, which is over $16 million. And the appropriations cap, which always tends to be a big number, and that's where we are this year to add to our overall cap, which is somewhere in the 7 million range or something. It's a big number. So personnel, we are actually down 2 from last year, and that has to do with the regional health agreement that we have with Westfield. We had a retirement last year of a registered health inspector, which we then, now Westfield's taking over. We are saving between $15,000 and $20,000 this year, having them perform that service. And then we decided this year, based upon the technology implementation in the kiosk area and parking, which we are now not filling a part-time position in the collection assistant spot. Salary and wages, this gives you for the really 4 areas. Uniform Construction Code is a trust, but it certainly factors into our overall personnel number. But they are a dedicated trust, so they fund themselves through fees, which that budget is in your packet, but it's not a part of the general municipal budget. And then this is just sort of what we looked at as a total benefit package of what you see when you factor in pension and health costs, what that number looks like, and really what it works out per employee, what we give an average cost, which gives you some estimate of what the average compensation is in addition to salary. And that just includes permanent and part-time employees, full-time and part-time employees. So municipal operations, this is the other, you have salary and wages and now other expenses of our municipal operations and the respective budgets. This is roughly about 20% of total, and then it just kind of gives you a few of the areas, again, a little more detail in the budget report. And nothing really stands out here other than, yeah. And then on the other appropriation side, healthcare, it's pretty flat. I mean, there's this very small increase, but actually the line item that you see in the municipal budget, the general fund municipal budget, is down about 50,000. Employee contribution is at about 1.3, which was the same as last year. And then we look at those who don't take, that opt out of the insurance, and do a cost estimate on what either they took or based on just sort of status and what we calculate that number to be. And there's, I think, about 17 employees that have opted out. And then these 3 other major cost drivers in pension, which is up almost 250,000. Debt service down considerably, but next year we anticipate, unfortunately, going back up to be 500, almost 564,000. One good thing about where we are with our capital improvement fund being over $500,000 higher this year than it typically is that I can assure you will not be that high next year. So we expect our capital improvement fund to be much lower. And as a result, I think that will offset this increase in debt service. And that was sort of what we were very mindful of when we were putting this budget together, that was happening and what we were anticipating next year. So that should offset that increase. And then this is just our current debt position. What we're allowed to statutorily go up to at 3.5%, and that's what that big number is, but certainly don't want to go anywhere near that. But that is the percentage of the overall maximum limit we could go up, and that's the 0.756% where we are. And just to give you a quick overview of the capital budget, this is the general fund. $11.8 million, $1.55 million is really the 2 items that comprise most of this capital budget. Parking is same as last year, sewer is considerably down from last year. And then this just gives you a breakdown of the change. Unfortunately, I just blow it away in administration this year, 6,100% increase, but that was, you were leading there for a while, Chief, but the recent the 7 Cedar Street acquisition is. And then parking and sewer. And then just quickly a few of the items in the capital budget. It's every project's listed in our in the executive budget that I put together, which will be on the website to see every project that's funded. But that's your total for each of the departments and some of the projects that we're looking, or equipment purchase we're looking to fund. new firehouse, which we were going through our process this year with the architectural construction document phase. That was funded last year, and hope to get to the bidding process the very earliest, the fourth quarter, if not first quarter, latest first quarter of next year, and then hopefully starting construction. And then just to show you the location at the Broad Street East lot. And then just the preliminary renting, which we will go through an exercise this year of what that will look like, which everybody will be involved in, and certainly the public will see. And Department of Community Services, the largest number of our budget outside of those two other items is in the infrastructure, road projects, and those are the road projects this year, Butler and those. And then some of the categories that are funded this year for just annual programs that we have. And then vehicle equipment, and some of those. And then there's the 7 Cedar Street acquisition. And again, this is to the public. I know we've said it at the last meeting, but this is a strategic acquisition for within our Broad Street West redevelopment project area. It was something that came onto the market. We felt the city needed to act on acquiring that piece of property to ensure, I think, a more, certainly in the negotiation phase, I think council unanimously agreed with that position that it will help facilitate that process when we get to it. So this is an important acquisition for the city in order to expedite the redevelopment of that area. And then community programs primarily is just more of the security surveillance, some of the park furnishings, and then parking and sewer. And really there's just an illustration of what we're trying to look at, whether we can do it or not, but sort of over the DeForest lot, entrance-exit machines, and they're trying to provide some cover protection for that area so we don't see shutdowns or the arm up where the city is not collecting on what it needs to collect. And that is it. Under 2 hours. It's pretty good.
Very good. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Council President.
So I want to open it up for folks, but before I do, I want to thank Michael, Marge, the department heads, their staff, the Finance Committee, which is chaired by Councilwoman Little, Steve Bowman's on it, and the mayor, who all I know worked very, very hard on doing this budget. We had many presentations. I think everybody knew what needed to be done and for fiscal responsibility, as well as, this is I'll say this and I'll have further comments at the end, I think, but this budget is thinking about what happens not just this year, but many years down the road. And it sets us up for that, because there's a lot of things that are going to happen in this spring. By the time we get to June, we are going to be in a very, very different position as a city going forward than where we have been for probably a very long time before us. And so it has a lot of interesting components to it. But let me leave it at that and open it up for folks who have questions. I know that we will have a hearing again on this in the second meeting in April. So folks at that point in time want to have questions. Certainly that makes eminent sense, having digested this stuff. But I know this is also stuff that people have been looking at and discussing since our capital budget presentation back in December of last year. So with that, Councilwoman Little.
Thank you, Council President. As Chair of the Finance Committee, I just want to reiterate what Council President said and thank Marge especially, but all the department heads. When I took over as Finance Chair last year as a new council person, I was beyond impressed with the care and the responsibility that each of the department heads takes in looking at their budgets and really being fiscally responsible, being committed to providing services to the city residents, but doing it in a way that does not increase the tax levies and put too much of a burden, and really being so cognizant of that and so careful with the budgets and the money and their personnel, and I continue to be impressed to this day. So thank you all for doing that work and maintaining those standards and doing the work that's necessary to go into this budget, which is a really responsible budget, I think. I just wanted to just maybe explain a little bit further. One of the points that you made is that without these two projects, the firehouse and the Cedar Street, we actually would have gone down in budget. But maybe if you could just speak for a moment about how those tie into the redevelopment, just briefly. So we're doing these capital outlays in this year in order to move forward the redevelopment project, so it's kind of an investment, but we are expecting to get a return through the redevelopment, so that those numbers are kind of not standing alone as 11.8 and 1.55. They're I would see them more as investments in our future that we're going to see a return from. And maybe if you could just explain that briefly.
Sure, Councilwoman. So the firehouse happens, the current firehouse facility location is within our Broad Street West redevelopment area. And it's located in an area that if it was to stay there, and I think not to get into the studies that have been conducted over the years, and one that when there was a needs assessment basically said the facility is antiquated, does not provide, meet certain standards. That's where we were. It certainly ties into the redevelopment approach because of where it's located and an area that we are looking to certainly have a vision and a revision of. And so we looked at that as an opportunity to not only address the inadequate facility that is there, but also we felt after much analysis that we needed to look for another location to get it out of that area and build a new facility. So right now what we have in this capital budget this year is an estimated number that our architects have provided an estimate on last year, and it doesn't, we're not spending that money this year. We will have to, it recognizes it as a project that the city would, through this budget, approve, but it does not, we are not looking to authorize, we're not going to look to the council at this point to authorize any funds through a bond ordinance. It just is recognizing the fact that this is what we're doing, and it's playing into off of what we already are moving on from last year's capital project through the architectural designs and construction bid specification creation. So that's part of it. So it's tied to the redevelopment area, and it's tied to a facility that is over 100 years old. And what we're looking to do is we've looked to another city asset of over on the east side, which is what the location, the ideal location that we identified. And the 7 Cedar Street, again, as I stated, was a building that is located right behind the firehouse. When you look at that area, it's in sort of the middle of that key area of redevelopment. So we felt it was important for us to move on to acquire, and then gives us some leverage to negotiate with a future redeveloper instead of trying to have a redeveloper negotiate with another third party in this process. So that's why we are recommending, and we did recommend to the council last council meeting to at least approve the purchase contract agreement execution, and now we're need to put it in our capital budget because we will have to spend money, and assuming we close on this at the end of April, which is our projected timeline. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councilman Gould.
Thank you. I'll reiterate my thanks for the excellent work and add on the Finance Committee, which has done a lot of the heavy lifting on this. So I want to talk about ratables. I know we've had an increase in ratables. I'm pretty confident in what it is, but can you talk a little bit more about our ratables story and what's the forecasting what are the drivers of those increases in ratables, and what's the forecast for ratables going forward, especially if we can get this redevelopment going?
So one of the challenges the city's had over the last few years is certainly tied to the Celgene West property and the settlement that was that we engaged in a few years ago. That site, since 2013, has lost over $130 million of assessed valuation. So it really is remarkable how the city has grown in value each year since. I mean, it maybe one year it went down a little bit, but we've maintained a very healthy market, not just in residential improvements, but also in the commercial area, which makes up a small part of our base. I mean, the residential component of our tax base is 83%. So it is a substantial part of our tax base, and there has been a lot of growth in that area. But there's also been additional improvement assessment levied against other commercial buildings, just by whether it's major gutting of a building or it's been new buildings. Certainly 466 comes to mind, which is something that went on last year. Celgene has done a lot of work on their East Campus that has helped. We will come to an end next year with that settlement and it's been sort of a clawback of roughly about $19 million each year. Next year, it's the last year of that settlement. So based on what they have proposed to the city in terms of redevelopment over on that site is critical. Now, we know that they're in an acquisition sort of negotiation stage of being acquired. But I have not heard any indication that they're going to deviate from what they are proposing, at least on the West Campus of redevelopment. So that's a very important piece for the city of what goes on over there. But we've had a healthy growth in our tax base, considering what we've lost. So
right, and just that was my question really. From my understanding, we had an increase of about $10 million in ratables, and the whole goal of the redevelopment, the Broad Street West redevelopment project. I mean, it's not the whole goal, but one major goal is to increase ratables in
not so much ratables as it is about municipal tax revenues. It's really about municipal tax revenues. So if the council decides to go down a long-term tax abatement, which is what you commonly hear a pilot, what that provides for is the improvements are not assessed in that area. It's the land value remains of what it was existing at that time the pilot agreement is actually executed, but you're looking for to get a percentage of the gross revenues from a residential project or commercial development of percentage. That's substantial because the city can get up to 95% of that number because you can get 95% of that, and the county gets their 5% of it. So there's substantial municipal tax revenues to be gained out of a redevelopment. That's why many municipalities go down that road.
Right. Thanks. I was just putting in context what Councilman Little said about this is an investment. It is a big cost up front, but it will have big rewards, and not like 30 years down the road, a few years down the road.
Yes, you're spending money on it. It's substantial. It's a big number, the firehouse, what we're looking at. But considering what, the facility that it is and what it will provide for many decades, getting that out of an area that you're looking to redevelop and get substantially more out of that right now, we get very little out of that whole area in form of municipal tax revenues. So there's substantial upside to that redevelopment area, which is why this council has pursued this over the years.
Right. If you'll permit me, I'd like to ask one more question. I don't actually understand the school district debt obligation on slide 24.
So Summit is a type 1 school district. The city is required to show the debt. We actually raise, when we go out for an issuance, we actually raise the school debt, long-term debt for them, short-term debt. We handle all of that for the school district. If it was a type 2, they would handle all of their issuances. So we are required to put it in that line item in the budget. What happens is that it gets backed out because ultimately it gets raised in their levy through their tax rate. So we have to show it in our budget, but it will come back. If you look at the budget and how it is backed out of that, our number, our overall budget number, it gets backed out of that number because they ultimately pay through their levy that portion.
Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Mike?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate all the thanks that went on earlier. So to the Finance Committee, thank you for steering that. This is a big lift, and obviously to the department chairs, Michael, Marge, thank you very much. I know how hard this is. I sat on finance for a long time, and this is consuming. So thank you for all of that, and thank you for a great, budget presentation and the numbers. And you always think about budgeting. When we sit up here on this dais and we decide what we're going to tell the taxpayers how much they have to contribute to services, it's a big deal. People, it's expensive to live in New Jersey, and it's easy to provide services, but it's not easy to provide services and do it in a fiscally responsible way. And to do both is difficult, and that's really hard work. And consistently, the municipality has continued to keep their tax rate below the 2% cap over the last 10 years. That's not easy to do when costs go up. We all see it in our daily lives, and but it's very, very important if we want to be able to keep affordability where it needs to be. And I wish all areas of our local government would look at that the same way. The cap is there for a reason, and it's hard work to keep it below 2%, but it's work that needs to be done. I think Councilwoman Little said it appropriately when we introduced an appropriations cap levy the other week, that busting a cap or going into a cap bank should be used for emergencies or unforeseen events. I wholeheartedly agree with that, and I'm happy to see our budget here does not do that. The school budget, unfortunately, does do that, and that's, I think, kind of problematic. But going back to the budget here, Michael, I just had a couple of questions around some of the revenue side. So you explained about the enterprise fund, particularly parking. And I know that, was it the Broad Street garage debt services have finally paid, we've paid all that off, so that's great. So now we have a parking garage, we've paid off the thing. So, and the way obviously our accounting works, they pay us for the debt service part, in years past, and then we paid the principal and interest out of our operating budget, correct?
So just to clarify that point, because I think it's important. So at one time before the city created the utility, parking was a part of the municipal budget, operating budget, the general fund budget. And when they took that debt out, it was a part of the general fund municipal debt. So when they created the utility, that debt was still there. The debt obligations and the associated payments, annual payments. Since it's now funded by fees, what the city created some time ago was that, and rightfully so, that amount would come back into the municipal budget as a revenue source. And that's that $408,000 as of last year that was there, and that's been there for many years. Well, it's now gone because the obligation has been fully amortized, right? So it's now paid off. So that was a loss of revenue of $408,000. And so now when we're looking at the utility doesn't have that $408,000 appropriation. And so certainly the utility has a very healthy financial condition and surplus. So we did increase that amount a little, approximately about $400,000 to come into the current fund to provide a revenue source that we ultimately were relying on for many years. And it's
right. But from the general fund's perspective, we don't have that revenue coming in.
Right.
But we also don't have the cost associated
Correct.
Going out.
Correct.
So those things just net out, right?
Yes, it's a net out.
So net for the city's operating budget, we now have an extra in this budget, at least $400,000 that is a net add from the parking utility
Correct.
to fund other city services.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
So I guess, you know what, when I think about that, that's great, and I'm glad that the debt's paid off, et cetera. But, you know, looking at that when we think about planning, you know, when we look at all these development all the so-called parts of the Broad Street West, there's a parking garage in there somewhere. And what we are hoping is that developers will pick up some of that, but we don't know if it's going to be, how much of that's going to be. So I know we will more than likely be incurring some sort of debt down the road for a parking facility.
And that's a good point that perhaps I failed to state before, which is those two costs, or at least what we're planning right now when we are looking to build a firehouse or acquire this property, we expect to get revenue back. When we sell the 7 Cedar Street, I mean, that certainly will be our intention. When we sell the land where the current firehouse is, there will be monies that come back to offset that cost in the future. So that's an important point to make and to keep in mind. So, and then the parking, again, that's going to be a negotiation that can morph into many things in many ways to structure it.
Great. And then I just was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit. You know, what one slide I thought was great was our health care costs. You know, you hear stories all the time about, you know, people getting blindsided by huge increases in health care. And I know they're, you know, the state had the employees contributing over the last several years. That was a big pressure point that was taken off of municipal budgets over the course of the last several years. That's done now. So I just was wondering how you can comment on how that health care number played out.
Sure. Cities in the state health benefit plan, fortunately, for the last few years, it's been fairly stable. I mean, flat for the most part. And the contribution portion of that started in 2011, and 4 years of a phase-in, and we're phased in probably employee contributions are $1.3 million to offset that $4 million total cost, gross cost.
And then, and the pension side you mentioned, that's just so the people at home are aware, that's just a number that the state gives us, correct?
Correct, and that number is tied to 2017 salaries. It's not in the given year. It's 2 years, a lag time period of 2 years.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone from this side of the dais? And don't feel obligated. That just means that next time, the next hearing, it's only on this side we're going to ask questions. Madam Mayor.
I actually just want to add my thanks, and being in and around City Hall a lot, I know the department heads worked really hard on their numbers, and there's also a whole group of people who spent a lot of hours proofreading. So we want to thank them as well. And I'm very proud of this budget, and I really appreciate all the work that everyone's put into it. It's I hear people all over town talking about how things are running smoothly. A neighbor just actually stopped me. He said he's lived here for 26 years and feels so great that things like the four-way stops and the sidewalk improvements are happening. So I know how hard everybody works, not just to get this budget, but then to spend the money really wisely throughout the year. So I want to thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Absolutely. I'm sorry, Steve.
Yeah.
Sorry, Steve.
Just one quick one, Matt. The one thing I wanted to state is, thanks to everything else, but I was really impressed by, as much as the capital budget has gone up, take out the firehouse and everything like that, I'm amazed at what we are forecasting to do and how we're going to maintain the roads and the infrastructure. And I really want to thank not only the Works Department or the CAP group there, but all the CAP department heads, because we're going to get a lot done at really and maintain the level of quality that we have here. So I really want to get that out to everybody as well. So that's my only comment.
Thank you, Steve. Matt, please.
I just want to send out a very special thank you to Rita McNanny for reducing payroll by one position through attrition, which is the best way to do it.
Okay.
Gold star.
Anybody else? Okay, I just, as I said, I'll close, and I think Councilwoman Little said it best. This is an investment budget, right? So this is looking into the long term. Couple of things I will reiterate. I think you mentioned this previously, Michael, but the 7 Cedar Street, that's going to remain a taxable property, and therefore, even when we, assuming that we will acquire it, and because the due diligence will come through fine, it'll still remain on the tax rolls and will be part of the redevelopment. Secondly, and I think important for folks who are listening, 2 different concepts were spoken about with regard to redevelopment as far as sources of revenue. One is the pilot, and the other is the sale of the property. The sale of the property is more immediate. Pilot could be over a longer term period of time. I think especially when thinking about the investment that we're making with regard to the fire station, as well as the 7 Cedar, but certainly the fire station, I've been very clear that my concept of that investment is because of the Broad Street redevelopment, and that it is completely tied to that concept, because I think when you look at how that area is, it makes complete logical sense. The fire station sitting there right in the smack dab center of it. And so, to me, this budget would look very, very different if we were sitting in December of 2019 than sitting here in March of 2019, because by that point in time, hopefully, we will have resolved many of these things that will come up in the next couple of weeks and months with regard to redevelopment, and we will know at the end of 2019 where we stand as far as how much we're going to be hopefully getting from the sales of these properties to offset the cost for the fire department new building, and what that means, and as well as what the long-term revenue projections from a pilot would be. So it's in a way, it's both an investment budget as well as it is a budget that if folks are saying, wow, look at that number, that seems high, yeah, that's just a temporary fact of where we're sitting today. But if we were sitting here at the end of the year, we would be looking at a very different type of budget and a different set. And I think the fact that we're taking those 2 strategic investments out, and we're talking about a 2.5% decrease in capital, while, as Steve pointed out, making so many different improvements and having a community center open this year, I think speaks volumes to how we have been able to achieve things. So thank you again, Michael. We look forward to a hearing and having the public. For those of you who are listening out there, if you want to come to the second meeting in April to talk about the budget. We're happy to hear any and all comments about it. And with that, I'm going to move on, and let's go on to the rest of the agenda.